Suddenlies and health crises in life, stories from my life. This video is more of a serious video, and it's stories from my life, and I kind of consolidated these stories into one. And so the video is a bit long, but I think that very, very well worth watching. And I'm trying to stay with lighter topics, and this most certainly is not one, but it's just part of my journey in life, and I'm sharing it with you. Okay, so stay tuned. Hold on. Grandma's porch. Sit down, relax, enjoy. Here on Grandma's porch. Health crises, stories from my life. Hello, y'all. I'm Dianna Brianne. Well, I don't give advice, suggestions, information, or recommendations. I just share with you my perspective on different topics, as is with this one. As y'all know, here lately, I've been sharing a lot of my stories with you all, trying to come up to lighter topics. But this one is not a lighter topic. This is one of the more serious topics. And I thought, I kind of thought to myself, no, I'm not going to do a serious topic stories, because I've done these before on here on YouTube. About a year ago, I shared many of these stories, or probably most of them. And I just thought, you know what, I just want to stay lighter, and I just want to share the fun stories. And I have been. I've shared drag queens in Newport Beach. I've shared a young doctor in love in Los Angeles, Mr. Big Boat, all of those wonderful stories. And they were lighter, and they were light topics, and the angel in the black Mercedes, and so many others, and all very light topics, because I did want to come up for air, so to speak. And yet I thought, you know what, I've told these stories before, but there's so many new people on my channel. And I thought, maybe I'll add more details, or consolidate the stories, or tell new stories, So this story is one, it's a combination of two separate stories, two different time periods. And I'm going to share them with you. And they're very serious stories with good outcomes. Okay, so I'm going to let you know that both outcomes had a happy ending, so to speak. And so I'm going to share with you the more recent one, which happened a little over 3 years ago. And then I'll go back a little bit, around 10 years ago. Okay, the first story has to do with my daughter. Okay, my daughter is beautiful. She was homecoming queen that year. And, she'd always been healthy. She never even got a cold. She got a cold one time in her life when she was really little, but she never even got a cold. She was never, ever, ever sick. We took all of our kids for annual visits to the doctor to have their physicals, and nothing was ever detected. And with any of, everything was normal with our kids. There was no reason to think otherwise. And so the doctors always gave them a clean bill of health. So when she was, the year that she became homecoming queen, she looked absolutely amazing. And, being in high school can be very stressful. And I feel like sometimes bad stress, can bring out physical illness that might be lingering somewhere but may not ever come about. But sometimes I believe that bad stress can bring out sickness. And I think just the stress that she was, the stresses of being in high school, and everything, daily stresses of trying to make good grades and all that. And of course, she had a great home life, and we were always supportive of her. And so anyhow, she started feeling like she had the flu. And so for about a week or two, she started really complaining. So I took her to the doctors, and they said, nothing's wrong with her. Just send her back to school. She had the flu. She's fine. And then I took her again to the doctors, and they said the same thing. And I just as a mother's instinct, I knew something wasn't right. I knew this was not any kind of flu. And they said, send her back to school. Send her back to school. And I did, and she said, Mom, I'm fine, but she just didn't look good. And something I knew as a mother's instinct, I knew something was off, and I knew something wasn't right, but she'd never been sick. So I was praying and hoping that it was the flu, like the doctors said. So finally I took her back. She was very spacey. She just couldn't focus. So I took her back to the doctors, and he said, no, she has the flu, but I'll do some blood work on her. Okay, anyhow. So we did blood work on her as we went out the door, and he said we could send her to school. And I was like, this is not like any flu I've ever seen. So we came home that night, and I said, if you're not better in the morning, I'm taking you to the emergency room. At least I always considered the emergency room the last, you only go there if you absolutely need to. And I felt that she absolutely needed to. But I also feel like they get the blood work, everything done immediately. And my husband said, well, the doctors have all said she's fine. And she said, yeah, Mom, I'm not going to no emergency room. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. I knew she was up walking around. She wanted to go to see her boyfriend. She wanted to go swimming that day. But I knew something was really off. And I said, when I get back, I'm going to go outside for a little bit. When I get back, I'm going to take you to the emergency room. And I said, I want you to be ready. She said, I'm not going. I said, well, if I have to carry you, I will. And so in the meantime, I get a phone call while I'm outside on my cell phone, and it was a doctor, and he said, immediately get her to the ER. Immediately get her to the ER. And so I did. He said her hemoglobin and hematocrit was 2.2, which we've never heard of anybody living at 2.2. And she not only was living, but she was up walking around. And so I put her in the truck. I got her right there, pulled up. I was terrified. And I took her in. They took her in immediately and put her down and put her on the gurney and transfused her with blood and got her up to like 4.4, and they didn't have a clue what was wrong. But later that night, they shipped her off to a university hospital in the middle of the night. I'm following her. And remember, I'm age 60 at the time. And I'm following her with big suitcases, following this ambulance, terrified out of my mind. What's happening? What's going on with my daughter? It was just beyond, I was horrified. And we get there. I beat the ambulance, meaning I got there before the ambulance did. And I carried all these big suitcases through the tunnels, because there was tunnels from the parking lot. And I'd never been to this hospital before, this town, middle of the night, 2:30 in the morning. I think it was 4 o'clock by then, by the time she got there. And they put her in the room. And of course, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And I started doing online research, and I came up with what I thought was wrong with her. And when I told them that, they said, yep, that's what we think it is too. And then but they sent her home. They sent her back. We'll treat it on an outpatient basis. She had portal vein occlusion. And it's a vessel that goes, and I'm not technical about this, but it's a vessel that I believe goes from the stomach to the liver, from the spleen. It's all kind of interconnected, intertwined somewhere in there. So I'm not technically up on this. Okay, so I'm not giving you all the technicalities, but it was called portal vein occlusion. And she had had it since birth. No one knew about it. And somehow she created little vessels around it that was able to, work perfectly fine. But at some point, those little vessels quit working so fine, and the blood was backing up. And so she was basically hemorrhaging, and it was horrible, 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 horrible. And so, but they said they were going to send her home. And I said, please, no. We got to get this resolved. They sent her home. It was only a day or two. She was feeling really great because she had all the, blood transfusions and everything. And it was only a day or two later that they went and I had the 911 again. I had the 911 because she was throwing up, and I called the doctor right away. He said, just have her 911. It'll be faster. And I had her 911, and she got to the emergency room, and we had to wait a total of 5 or 6 days before we could get her to the University Hospital again from here because they didn't have any beds there. So finally they transferred her, and I mean, by then I was just worn out, exhausted, tired. And I did, you know, I journaled this over on my other social media pages because I didn't journal it here on YouTube at the time. And so anyhow, my daughter, they said she has to have this surgery. And they did what was called something like a splenorenal shunt. And they had to do that. And it was a major, major, major life-saving surgery. And I mean, it was a life-saving surgery, okay? And it wasn't like one that was optional or maybe or whatever. She had to have it to save her life. And she was in the surgery a long time. And I just fell apart. I fell apart. And I remember looking at the helicopters coming in out the window and bringing people and, you know, in and from other places. And I was just beyond anything. And my husband was there with me. And when the surgery was done, they called us down to this little room. And I fell apart because I didn't think that was a good sign to be called to a little room at the end of the hallway. And my legs gave out. My legs gave out on the way, and my husband had to hold me up. It was horrible, horrible. But she had made it through the surgery successfully, and but it was going to be months of recovery because the incision was big and everything else. And so, long story short, a mother's intuition goes a long ways. And had it not been for my mother's intuition, I wouldn't have kept taking her back to the doctors and back to the doctors. I would have probably listened to the first one. And in thoughtfulness to those that misdiagnosed her or lack of diagnosis in the beginning, she had never been sick. So they probably had no reason to look any further than the flu. And so, but she survived, and now she's thriving, and she's living on her own, and she's doing amazing. And through something like that, has she had a few little health minor issues? I think so. She'll always have to be mindful of what she's been through, but she's doing really well. She's working, and she's, you know, got a boyfriend, and she's doing remarkable. But it was one of the scariest, if not the scariest time of my life, okay? Well, I want to go on to the second story, and this is another health crisis thing, and it has to do with me. This is a long video, but I'm consolidating 2 stories into one video, so you might want to go to the bathroom and then come back and watch the rest of this. I don't know. I'd never been sick a day in my life, not really to speak of. And all of a sudden, I get this back pain. I'm going to give you a little backstory on this. My husband and my sons were away on a camping trip, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't breathe. I was choking. I called my sister, and my sister said, well, you know, it's probably an anxiety attack. I said, well, why would I have anxiety? I've never had one before, but I guess it must be. I was choking. So we chalked it up to anxiety. Okay, because I'd never been sick. So about 2 days later, my husband comes home and with the boys, and but the night before, my back was really bothering me. I had this, it felt like someone was pressing in the back of my back with their thumb, or like a quarter, you know, like a quarter size, and it was like pressing. And I thought it was from carrying a big purse because I carry big purses. And but right before that, while my husband was gone, I was on the phone in the evening, and I heard a noise at the top of the steps. Well, I thought it was my daughter asleep. And so I put down the phone, and I went around the corner, and there was this huge possum, huge. And the eyes were red. No kidding you. They were red, beet red. Now, someone told me that possums and that their eyes will look red at night, and that could very well be. It was at the second step down. I have no idea how it got in the house. And it just stared at me. It stared at me. Well, if that was a sign of what was to come, I believe that possum staring at me like that was telling me something. Now, I know that sounds crazy to y'all, but I believe in things like that. And I clapped my hands and it ran back up the steps. And we never found it again. We had the possum people come out, everybody, but never to see that possum again. And anyhow, now fast forward. So I go to bed early because my back is bothering me. I get up the next morning, go downstairs. This is not in this house. This is in another house in Georgia. And I go downstairs and I said to my husband, I said, my back's really bothering me. I'm going to get my coffee and go back to bed. And I went to see what the kids were doing in the sunroom. And as I'm going there, I just go right down to the floor. I'm on the floor, passed out, cold and clammy. My husband comes over, yelling, Dianna, Dianna, Dianna. He's shaking me, and I come out of it. But all of a sudden, my heart is just thumping and beating, and I'm cold and clammy. And I get up, and I stagger into the mother-in-law suite, and I fall onto the bed in the mother-in-law suite. And I just lay there, and my leg wouldn't stop quivering. It just wouldn't stop quivering. And so this was the beginning of a terrible journey for about a year. And that day we had to take the motorhome over to my husband was moving up here where we are now, which is still a southern state, a very southern state, but a different area. And he was taking the motorhome. We had a big, beautiful new motorhome. He was taking it, so he was going to live in it the next year while we had our house remodeled and then put it up for rent. Down there, and I wanted to get the kids through their school because I had 2 of them back in public school after homeschooling for a while, and I didn't want to pull them out right away. So I was staying in the area that we were at, but the step on the motorhome had broken, so we had to take the motorhome over, and I was going to follow him in the motorhome. He was going to be in the motorhome. I was following him in my expedition. My leg was quivering so bad, quivering, it wouldn't stop, that I had to pull over almost to the motorhome place. And I was able to walk. I was able to get out of the expedition and go climb up into the motorhome and ride the rest of the way to take the motorhome. And we ended up having to have them take my husband back to the car, the expedition, to pick it up and come back and get us because I was still in the motorhome waiting, so we could leave it there. And that was a horrible, horrible journey. My heart began to thump. I just had about 30 different symptoms that didn't make any sense. They didn't even go together. They were like all over the board. You name the symptom, I had it. And at one point, and I don't even know how this relates to this, but I had a lump on my foot, on the bottom of my foot. I went to the doctors and they said, you've got a lump on the bottom of your foot. And I said, I know. And they took an x-ray and it didn't show up in the x-ray, which was unbelievable. They took an MRI. It didn't show up. So it was it was as if, I don't know. It was a terrible, terrible year. And there I was now in Georgia, sick, but I didn't let my kids know. I was functional sick. I was walking around. I was bumping into walls. I didn't drive very far. I would just drive, very short distances. I was okay to drive, but walking, I would lose my balance. And I lost my balance. I was choking all the time. I was spitting up phlegm constantly and paper towels. I'd have to carry a roll of paper towels with me, which is, I've heard, a sign that there's a neurological disorder going on. Not psychological, but neuro. It means something's happening. Something happened in the brain somewhere. And I was told that later. But I had to have a spit cup. It was horrible, and what I was going through. And none of these symptoms went together. My heart racing, I was choking in the middle of the night. And I went to the doctor, and they chalked it up to anxiety and menopause. Oh my gosh. Well, I have to tell you, that was my doctor for quite a while, and I ended up firing him and getting another doctor. And that doctor wasn't very good either. It was terrible. I was going to all, but at least that doctor was sending me to all these specialists who couldn't find anything wrong with me, but we were looking in the wrong area. We were looking at the heart, we were looking at this, we were looking at kidneys, we were looking, there was one point where I had to carry jugs of pee back to the hospital with ice around it so that they could send it off to, I think it was the Mayo Clinic or one of those big clinics. I mean, they had all kinds of possible diagnoses, which were so scary for me. I thought, oh my gosh, this is horrible. So I created these boxes for my kids and labeled them, don't open till you're 30. It was all their baby mementos, and I sealed them up, you know, because I began to make videos and talk to the kids, you know, mommy loves you. And, you know, that was when my wisdom was all starting, you know, when my wisdom I've had, but when I began to really do wisdom videos, because I wanted my kids to have my wisdom. I wanted them to have my daily wisdom. And here I'm trying to be a mom. I'm really like a single mom at that time because my husband was up here and he would only come back every couple weeks because it was, you know, quite a few hour drive. And I was calling him constantly and saying, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm so sick, I'm so scared. And, you know, it was a very, very scary time, but I didn't let my kids know I was sick. I would walk them to the bus stop in the morning. And I remember the exact nightgown I had on. It was like a big dress, a floral, velvety type of dress I used as a nightgown so I could walk to the bus stop in it. And I would pray all the way to the bus stop. And it wasn't that far. It was just at the end of the street. And I would pray all the way back that I could make it back to my driveway. I didn't want to collapse in the middle of the street. It was such a scary, scary time. I mean, I could go down a whole list of different symptoms I was having. And I can understand why someone would think, you know, maybe I was a hypochondriac or something, because none of these symptoms made any sense until later. So I had no idea what was wrong with me, nor did the doctors. And I think I'd went through a lot of doctors. How many, I'm not even sure now, but a lot of specialists. And so I had this dream. My mother had already, you know, she'd passed on about 2 years prior. And I had this dream. My mother came to me and I was laying on a gurney in a cafeteria waiting for surgery. And part of my head was shaved. And I said, Mom, why are you so anxious? Why are you so nervous? She said, you've got to have surgery right away. You've got to have surgery right away. You have a lesion on the left side of your brain. So it was Thanksgiving. My husband came down. We had Thanksgiving. I had cut my arm open because I'd burnt my arm and cut my arm open because I had bumped into a nail because I'd lost my balance. And I didn't notice when I was making the turkey that I burnt myself because I was losing sensation. And it was terrible, terrible, terrible. And so I was so weak. And I normally put the Christmas tree up before Thanksgiving. And I think I put it up right on the day after Thanksgiving. And I was so weak, and I would put one bulb up. I would have to sit down for 10 minutes. And I called my sister and I said, I have to sit down. I put a bulb up and I have to sit down for 10 minutes. I don't know what's wrong. So Thanksgiving Day, it was the Thanksgiving weekend. So it was a Friday into a Saturday, I believe. It could have been Thanksgiving night after Thanksgiving, but I'm not sure. But it was in there. And in the middle of the night, I got up and I said, I'm going to drive myself to the ER. Now, I had been to the ER once before, a different ER. And I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought maybe it was a heart attack. And that's all they looked at. They didn't look at anything else. And they sent me home. And I thought, they're just going to send me back home. So I felt like I was having a stroke or something like that. I mean, I didn't know, you know. So I went to the ER and I said, I think I'm having a stroke. So they took me in right away. And then I said, my mother told me that I have a lesion on the left side of the brain. Well, a lesion I thought meant, you know, cancer. And so the young doctor decided to put me in the CAT scan. Something nobody had done. Well, the whole time I'm in the CAT scan, I'm telling the lady through the little microphone that they have inside the CAT scan what my mother told me. And she kept saying, what did your mother tell you? Tell me the details again. I said, lesion on the left side of the brain. Well, see, she was able to read the CAT scan the whole time. Well, you can only imagine when I got back to the ER what the doctor told me. He said, ma'am, your mother was right. You have a lesion on the left side of your brain. We're going to keep you here for observation at this point. They kept me there. They sent in specialists and everything. Apparently, I had broken a blood vessel. somewhere along the line in my brain. And we believe that that could have been the direct result of when I plowed into a wooden hanger that was wedged in the doorway holding a suit jacket of my husband's that was sticking out. It hit me in the eye. I ran into it, blunt force, knocked me to the ground. I'm so fortunate that I have my eyesight and that I've lived through all this. But that could have very well been when this all took place from the blunt trauma, because a lot of people die from blunt trauma. And so, because all these symptoms came after that incident. And I was rushing through the mother-in-law's suite, and I don't rush, but my kids were calling me, they were in the sunroom, and I was going through, and the mother-in-law's suite was darkened at the time because we didn't have the lights on in there, and that was when I plowed into it. And so I had apparently had some form of a brain bleed. And at that point, they couldn't really do anything. It had, and they didn't do surgery. But my mother had come to me in that dream. She had come to me from the other side, I believe, and told me exactly word for word what I needed to tell the doctors. And they told me word for word what my mother had told me. And so it took me about a year total. I had so many different symptoms that would pop up. And, but it took me about a year, but I started improving. I started to improve. And it was during that time I couldn't get, I wouldn't drive very far. I would only drive a very short distance. My husband was gone. And my sister, and this is another story, I'll throw this one in here too, so it's like 3 stories in one. I'll make this brief. She called me. We were very close on the phone. We talked every day. And she said she's going to a friend's house to play a board game. And I said, okay. And she said, I'll talk to you tomorrow, whatever. I get a message later that evening from her friend's son. This is like her childhood friend, but now they're older, and they played board games on Saturday nights. And my sister had skidded on black ice and went over the hill and hit a tree. She was okay, but she was in the emergency room, and then they put her in intensive care. But I talked to her on the phone, and she said, I'm in a lot of pain, but I'm okay. I think I should go home. I think she would have probably been okay had she gone home. Let me just put it that way without going into all the details. The next day she had some kind of reaction to the dye that they used to check her over, and they put her on a respirator. And essentially, she only came off one time, very briefly. When I was on a fast, I was praying and fasting, and she came, because I believe in prayer and fasting, and she came off the ventilator, and she talked to me on the phone, and then within a day or two, she passed on. And that was on her birthday that she came off the ventilator. And then she passed away. They put her back on, and then she passed away shortly after that. So that was a terrible year. That was a terrible year of my life. But I do believe in prayer and fasting, because I had another episode where my mother, and I've told this story, I was a caregiver for my mother for about 3 years. She had Parkinson's and what we believe to be ALS, and it was just terrible. And it hit her brain at the end. And towards the end, she was just screaming and hollering, and she had to be in the nursing home at that point. I had taken care of her in my home up until the point I couldn't take care of her anymore. And when she was in the nursing home, I started praying and fasting, and she was going downhill so bad. And they gave her a blood transfusion, and she was like her old self. She was like, she came back to life. Meaning that her mind came back, everything came back. It was amazing. And she came out of that whatever she was in for about 2 weeks, and then she slipped back into it. But I was given that time with my mom, to just talk wonderful, old times, and talk and conversation with her one more time. And I cherish those moments, and my kids have pictures with her during that time. But then, the second time around, I said she was losing the blood again, and I said something from her stomach. It was something, they had a tube in her stomach, and so I said, please send her back, because she was in real bad shape. So they sent her back to the emergency room, but this time they really couldn't do anything for her, and she passed too. So that was a very traumatic time period, losing my mom, me being so sick, and then losing my sister. And so, when you're facing a health crisis, and I know this video is very, very, very long, and I really didn't want it to be this long. So, you know, but I felt that there was a lot I wanted to cover. And when you go through a health crisis, and in both situations, all of these situations, it was really a suddenly. Now, my mom's wasn't a suddenly because she was sick for quite a few years with the Parkinson's and what we believe to be ALS. And so she was going downhill. But my sister's was a suddenly, my daughter's was a suddenly, mine was a suddenly. My mother's was, you know, we knew that she was going downhill. And about a week before she passed, it was surreal. I just knew that she was probably not going to make it. And the day that she passed, I'd spent the day with her, thinking that I could come back the next day and spend it with her. And then she just kind of slipped into a deep coma. And they called me at midnight to come over. And I went to get dressed and to go over. And she was gone before I could get dressed and get over there. So, you know, things happen. And this was a very, very somber video, and I'm all about sharing happy videos. I don't, you know, I want to share happy videos, but I think that you know, things can happen in life, and those were very traumatic experiences for me, very traumatic experiences. And I guess if you live long enough, you see a lot of things, and I did. And I'm so grateful my daughter is, you know, she's recovered from that surgery, and I'm so grateful for the great surgeon that she had. She had an amazing surgeon, and he was amazing. He saved her life, and he was an angel, an earthly angel. And, you know, losing my sister was extremely traumatic. Probably 20 years before that, I had lost my brother, and that was traumatic. I think I even told that story once before. I don't want to cover all these stories again. That's why I'm kind of throwing them all in at once, but I had to tell my mother the horrible news, and that was horrible. We were living in Palm Springs, and I had to dash out to where she was, and she was at a friend's house, and I had to tell her that horrible news and what happened to my brother. And of course, my mother was never quite the same after that. You know, it was terrible. It was terrible. So I shared these stories with you. They're suddenlies, they're health crises. My mother's was more predictable at the end. But, you know, I believe in living fully. I believe in savoring every moment that we're given. I believe in not focusing on the bad stuff. That's why I try to focus on all the good topics and not the ones like this. You know, I'm just sharing with you my journey. I'm not giving information, suggestions, nothing. I'm just sharing with you what happened and my experiences dealing with suddenlies, and it was suddenlies. And I don't take anything in life for granted, and you know, especially after all of that. You know, I tell the people that I love them. I let them tell me that they love me. I believe in embracing and living fully and live your life fully. And so I was very fortunate to come out of all that I did with my health crisis. My daughter was so fortunate to come out with, you know, the way she did. And remember, listen to your intuition. Your intuition can be so right. And, you know, in the situation with me being sick, the doctors were wrong in the beginning. And the same way with my daughter. And doctors are human too. And we've had many amazing, wonderful doctors. But sometimes people can not be diagnosed properly in the beginning because, you know, life is complicated, and, you know, no matter how great a doctor is, some can make, you know, mistakes or misdiagnoses or whatever. But thank God for the, you know, the skill of the doctors, because they also save lives, and as they did with my daughter. And that was a different doctor that did the surgery, and different doctors, and she's had wonderful doctors. You know, it's just, who would have ever thought something like that could happen to her, or what happened to me. So I came on here, I wanted to share this. I don't even know if I'm going to put this up. Because it was such a heavy topic, and I really didn't want to talk about it, and it's really very draining. And that's why I'm very focused on the positive topics, okay? So, but I like to share with you, because you never know whose life you're going to touch in a positive way with your story, okay? So from my house to yours, may God bless you and I hope to talk to you soon again. Bye-bye. Grandma's porch, a place to relax.